Action. There we go. Okay, so I will start off by reading the open meeting law. Um, the notice is pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, Senate Bill 3007, signed into law by the governor on July 16, 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law 30A, subsection 18. This meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. All meetings and hearings listed in the agenda will also be done so through the remote participation. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with the right and or requirements to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at shrewsburyma.gov/coronavirus. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Welcome, everyone. It is 6:03. We'll call this meeting to order. Any board member comments? There being none, I am going to turn it over to Jen Golson so that we can review the Affordable Housing Trust Action Plan.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here. Hello, everyone. So we sent you the revised action plan. This one that you have now has the budget for the first time. So, and we don't expect you to say, this is perfect budget. We wanted to get you something to start out with, something to talk about. There's a lot of assumptions embedded in that, a lot of different directions we can go. So that's what I want to spend most of our time tonight talking about. I also revised the year one action plan. I think it's a little more detailed, a little more thorough. And so I'm happy to review that too. But if it's okay with you, I'd really like to start with the budget. And then if we have time to also review the action plan, we can do that. And just as a reminder of our next steps. So I'll be doing another round of revisions based on our conversation tonight. And then we'll be getting ready for the select board presentation, which I believe is confirmed, but Louise or Christopher, correct me if I'm wrong, for the 26th of September. Is that right? Great.
Yeah.
And I know that the packet is due 2 weeks before, so we'll need to get the revisions back to the town by the 12th. Yeah.
Yeah, no later.
No later than the 12th. Yeah. So that's what we'll be doing in terms of next steps. Unless there's any questions on that, I'd love to just share my screen and we can dive into the budget. Does that sound good?
That sounds good, because I think the ones that I printed did not have it. So I don't know.
Oh,
maybe I was working
we
off the
sent an
wrong-
earlier version to get out the revisions we talked about at the last meeting. And then I sent a second version last week that included that budget.
All right.
Okay, so
No problem.
me see if I can share my screen.
I'm going to move you to the larger screen, so I'm going to look away from the camera so I can see this
Okay.
as well.
All right. Can you guys see this okay? I can zoom in, but you can oh, sorry. Now I can't see you all. Okay, now I can see you guys. Can you see this all right? Okay. Hold on.
Yes, we can.
It's hard because I can't see both you and so I'm going to not look at you guys. If you have a question or want to tell me anything, just speak up because I won't be able to see you for just a little bit while I'm presenting this. Okay. All right. So let me just go through how this is structured and what some of the assumptions are, and then we can discuss if it makes sense and what should be changed. So this is the current, the 956,000 plus is the current balance that I had a record of. That it could be, that's a few months old now, so it could be that that changed. If that changed, happy to make adjustments there, but I just started with that starting balance. And just so you know, in case any of you actually are accountants, I am not an accountant. So the way I do this is a way that makes sense intuitively to me. I've been doing this kind of a budget for probably over a decade now. But if you're actually an accountant, you might look at this and say, what the heck is she doing? So this is just the way it makes sense to me. I'm going to explain the way I look at this, and I'm happy to make changes if it doesn't make as much sense to you as it does to me. So we start with this balance, and then we basically run down this way. So the first assumption is that you would receive 30% of your total estimated CPA revenue. So you could tell me if that's crazy, or if you want to shoot higher than that, or lower. But I needed to pick a number. And what I like to do is pick a number that is, going to be predictable for this budget for each year. If you wanted to be very conservative, you would pick closer to that 10%, which is the required amount that the CPA funds need to either be spent or set aside for housing. But I went a little more aggressive here. You may tell me I'm off base, but I wanted to also get you to a number that I think you could have some potential of implementing those development initiatives. And we'll get down here in a minute, but to some extent, I was working backwards a little bit, thinking, well, what would be realistic budget to have to actually support some land acquisition and some investment in pre-development work or even construction grants or loans. And it's not a lot of money, but I think it's doable the way I've put this out. So that's the first one. 30% of, and the other thing you should know is I did not account for estimated tax levy growth. I'm happy to add that in. I would just need a little bit of guidance. I can run 2.5%, but I don't know if there's any other growth from new development, new growth that the town would be projecting. So if you want me to get this a little bit more realistic, rather than, this is very conservative, assuming that the total annual CPA funds will basically remain constant over the next 5 years, which we know isn't true. We know that they'll grow. So, so that 30% would actually be a little bit more each year. Now, the only caveat here is I'm also making some assumptions on the state trust fund distribution, and that, of course, is variable. So I just took your first trust fund distribution and your local collections, and then I just carried that annual figure across. So there's a bunch of assumptions embedded here to talk about. The first is the 30%. The second is, how do you want me to deal with estimated growth? And then the third is, what's the best way that we should deal with variability in a state match? Let me just go through this the rest of the way, and then we can go back. The second thing is, I didn't carry any funding for inclusionary zoning in lieu payments. I did have a little back and forth with Chris, and there actually might be some, but it's unsure, we're unsure at this point. So the most conservative way to handle it is just to carry zero for that. And then if you get some payments, it's an added bonus to the budget here, but you're not counting on it to perform and implement your initiatives. You did get a developer fee at one point, negotiated developer fee, but I just left that here the same way I'm looking at the inclusionary zoning. Nothing guaranteed about it. There's nothing that we know of in the works. But if you ever did get another developer fee, that would go into this line item, and that would be another kind of bonus in whatever year that would be. The interest, we do have some new information. Louise, thank you for reaching out. And I did see the answer that it was, now I forget the number, it was like 40 or 50,000, I think, that the interest.
Yeah, it was about 48,000.
48,000 for the interest. And so, I don't know what the percentage is, because she said it was variable. So we could just look at what that percentage is off of the 956. perhaps, and just run that as a percentage off of your balance. But I do want to add that in because if it's, 50, 100,000, it's definitely something to add in there. So we'll add that in. So just with the CPA and your current balance, that's really all that we're making as part of this current budget. In the first year of this budget, you'd have about almost 1.3 million, 1.28. And then if you look down on expenses, so I have some administrative expenses. I don't think you have this much administrative expenses right now, but I think it might be helpful to have some administrative assistance. At the very least, a clerk to take minutes. I'm not sure if a member of the planning board does that now or a member of the press, but that's pretty common to have someone hired to basically come to your meetings and make sure that they do the minutes. You also can have some budget that you carry just in case you do need any services, legal services or other services, especially if you're looking at doing these development initiatives. You probably will need to use a little bit of admin funds here and there. So you could change this number. I was thinking, this clerk that you hire, might be, I don't know how much. We can run the numbers and see if it makes sense. But I was assuming around 12,000 or so a year. And then we have about 20,000 or so for other fees, legal fees, etc. So those numbers, of course, can be changed, but I just wanted to put something in there and run something for the purposes of this first budget. And then really the initiative, you have a lot of initiatives in there that don't cost money. They're advocacy, they're looking at nurturing partnerships and things like that. But the one that will really cost some money is development initiatives. And so you can see that the way we've structured this is and it's tied to the action items and kind of the rhythm of them. So you have a potential acquisition in this first year. If you can, obviously find something, we can talk more about how that would work. But the assumption is within the first year, you're going to find something. And then this smaller amount kind of follows up as it's either some pre-development work or it's kind of a small token towards a construction subsidy. And then there's really nothing. The next year you're kind of getting ready for something else, and you're making sure that this development, gets all its permitting and gets off the ground and all of that. And then the next year, so this would be FY 2027, you'd have another big expenditure of another acquisition. And then I didn't follow up with a subsidy because the numbers don't work. You really can't afford it unless we boost some of the revenue numbers. But you could afford another acquisition potentially. And this is all very wishy-washy because maybe you find something for, a little bit less than that or a little bit more than that. So these numbers obviously would change then. I want to go through some of those assumptions though on the development initiatives because there's a number of ways we could look at this. I did get a sense, I just did a quick Zillow search when I was putting these numbers together to see how much vacant lots we're going for in Shrewsbury. And I found a few. And the listing prices varied from a low of $249 for about 0.29 acre lot up to 5.1 million for 38 acres. But then most of them were more in that, 350 to 455 range. There were only a few. There's only five or six that I found. I put the addresses here just in case you wanted to look them up. There's probably more. I just did it on this one particular day. I took a snapshot and I saw what was out there. And so this just gives me a sense. So if we look at that 455 figure for 1.68 acres, that's why I carried $1 million. It gives you a little bit of flexibility. Maybe you end up buying even a couple lots, a couple buildable lots, then you put them out for RFP to seek a developer, something like that. So this is all very loose right now, but that's why I ended up with that $1 million. So I'm sure there's a lot to talk about, but let me just go through. I kind of started to go through how this was structured, and then I got myself sidetracked onto these details. So up top, of course, is the projected revenue, total revenue here. And then on the bottom is projected expenses and total expenses here. And then this is just the net. So if you really did make 1.28 million in revenue, which is your existing balance plus an assumed CPA appropriation minus the two expenses we're showing here, you'd end up carrying over 257.23 to the next year. And then that cell just gets copied here as your starting balance. And then we go through and add the CPA funds again. We'll add the interest when I put that figure in, and then we subtract these fees, and we end up with a net balance of 415, which gets carried up. So it's pretty, I think it's pretty straightforward, but again, my brain might just work differently than your brain. So if this doesn't make sense, I'm happy to make adjustments. But why don't we pause and just kind of talk about, I just gave you a lot of information, a lot of assumptions to think about. And I just want to know what your kind of initial reactions were, and if you're feeling like any of these should be adjusted, any of these assumptions or numbers.
So, Jen, it's easy to follow. I mean, for me.
Great.
So I could follow the logic. My concern is, my first question would be with the CPA.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, when we approached them last year for the application, I think it was, we got a hard no for the 10%. And I think that, the 30% might be a little aggressive for the first fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
I believe maybe, if we request the 10% for the first year, show them what we have in the pipeline, and then go in for a higher amount in the subsequent years. I think that might be a good strategy, and get them to a comfort level where they can see some movement.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I'd probably do then is shift the acquisition assumptions by a year so that your big ticket items are a year later for each one, because you won't have enough revenue built up. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then for our application, when we're putting the request in, we can, put in that, we're looking to acquire, some vacant lots, just as you identified here, so that it'll show that we need the sources to make the purchases.
Exactly. And then, of course, if you end up getting if the town transfers land to you that's developable, then you won't need to spend that much for acquisition. So that's, another factor to consider. I was trying to be conservative and thinking, well, if you had to buy land, I want to make sure you have enough there to make it realistic.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, that makes sense to me. What do others think to reduce that first year down to the 10%, and then in the following years, maybe we stick with the 30%? What do others think?
I think it makes sense. Go a little more conservative on the first year, because we have to have a plan to show them what we're doing. And I think 10% would be probably more realistic.
Yeah. And I know they're a new CPA, but do they have any revenue built up in their reserve for housing right now? Because you may want to ask for what's built up in the reserve plus the 10% for the new year.
Yeah, so they do have
No, go ahead. I was
Sorry.
going to say, I don't know the answer to that, Chris.
yeah, so they do have a reserve built up, and they have not expended it. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. I can probably look it up. I think, from that discussion, I think from the previous year, I think the 10% is probably conservative. I think we can go with that ask. And I think there is an interest, and from discussions during their community needs, they would still be willing to coordinate from that reserve on project specific amounts. So I think we could add that as like a caveat. So if we're looking for an acquisition or a specific project that we have lined up, I think, they want to hold that reserve amount, but they would be willing to do a partnership project. I can't speak for them for sure, but I think that's the feeling that I got from the discussions.
Okay. What else? What do people think about some of those other assumptions baked in here, either on the revenue side or the expense side?
I don't want to hog it up. I want to give somebody else a chance before I jump back in.
I'll jump in. Certainly agree with excuse me, Hector and like everyone else, I guess, about asking for a smaller, more conservative number in the beginning,
Mhm.
and then kind of gradually working our way up. I do know for the expense side, the select board does have we are looking at different town-owned lands and strategizing on how we'll use some of those, so that will help in terms of transferring lands over to the AHT. More to come there, but
Okay, that's good to know.
um,
Do you feel like I should acknowledge that at all, or is it too early and we should just go with the assumption that we're looking to acquire at this point?
That's a good question. I mean, it's one of our priorities for the year, so I think it's okay to acknowledge that that's in the pipeline.
So what I could do is I could put it in the notes section, just something about, that this expense would be greatly reduced if the town transferred fund, and I could do something like that, and then just leave the numbers the way we just talked about changing them, but leave it in as an acquisition, and then put a note about a potential transfer in just a vague way, because I know there's not a specific property or anything that we could talk about.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I'd be comfortable with that.
Okay, that would be great. What else? Let's talk about the admin. Do you have any admin expenses right now?
I was going to ask Chris, what came out of the regional housing coordinator role that we were looking at? I know
Thank you.
that-
They did select a person for that role. And thank you. I should reach out. I think she just started this week or last week, so they're still getting up to speed, but we'll have an introduction with her when she's ready to go. So obviously, this fiscal year, I think we talked about it previously, there's no cost. They're funding that position through a grant. And then subsequent years we'll be able to assess based on an hourly rate, essentially purchasing hours of services for that position. So
Would that be funded by the trust then in the future years?
yeah, I think that's the intent.
That was the plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have any sense of like just rough, this budget obviously could change, but just roughly, I was thinking 12,000 for just general admin help. I mean, I was thinking more of a clerk for minutes, but it could be a housing coordinator too. Would 12,000 a year be in the ballpark, or what do you think?
I think it would be, what I want to do is I'll look back at, they had, when they were advertising for the position and setting up that program, they did provide us with a spreadsheet of what they kind of anticipated those costs to be. So I'll get that over to you so we can kind of dial that in a little bit
Okay.
more.
And then do you feel like actually remind me how you guys do the minutes now. Do you feel like having help with that aspect of doing the clerical piece would be helpful?
Very helpful. I know that, everyone here, Chris and Luis, they have their hands full.
Yeah. And do other boards and committees already hire people to do that? I mean, oftentimes what we find in towns is, the same one person might do multiple boards and committees and kind of works on the side doing that. Is that a situation that you guys have seen in Shrewsbury?
Yeah, typically either a board member, if they have a clerk that does it, or we have staff that provides that support as needed. So
Like on
Um,
a for hire basis, though, that's what I mean. Like almost like a moonlighting that I mean, I've known people that just come in and do minutes for boards.
Right. I'm not aware of us doing that for any of the boards in town. We typically use in-house staff support. I could see us shifting some of those responsibilities to the regional housing coordinator, and then if we don't have any big projects to work on, using some of that as administrative time. But
Okay, so in terms of who does it, we might not be able to solve that right this moment, but at least having some budget for that. And then Chris, maybe you and I can work offline just about what would be reasonable to, assume for those kinds of services, if it's the regional housing coordinator or someone else doing that, but just to make sure we have enough assumption both for like clerical minutes kind of stuff as well as more technical services.
Yeah, I found the information, Chris, and I know that initially we were talking about 4 hours a week, but I think that, I think we might go at 7.5. Well, we can budget for 7.5 hours. And the assessment, the 2023 assessment for the 7.5 was 31,200. The 24 was 32,760. And the 25 was 34,398.
yes, I mean and I think that kind of fits with that admin that Jen is showing. So
Yes, yeah, it'll give us some
and I
wiggle
think-
room, and I think that the
Right.
numbers are real, so that'll be it.
Yeah, you just
Something-
might need a little more on the years of acquisitions, unless, I mean, are you getting supported by the town's legal services, town attorney to do like help with closings and things like that? Oftentimes that's additional fee for the trust.
We haven't had a project, so I haven't had that conversation. So, there may be some support, or that's something that we could kind of work out, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I feel like I'd want to, just to give you guys I like to be as conservative, and then if you don't need to spend the money, you don't need to spend the money. But if you assume that, sliding scale there of the 31,200 in the first year and going up from there for the regional housing services, and then add some on top of that for potential legal services, especially in the years we're looking at acquisitions, that would give you a little buffer so you could hire your own counsel to help you with closings and title search and all that kind of stuff you have to do. Does that make sense?
Always better to put in the budget now than ask for it later.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I'll do a buffer for like legal services. Okay, so that admin line will end up going up. I mean, it's good for the regional housing services roughly. I'll change it per the numbers Hector just said, and I'll try to see what that percent increase is and then just carry that across for FY 27 and 28, because Hector just had the first 3 years. And then I'll add in the acquisition years, I'll add some more for legal, probably like 20,000. It's just a gut feeling. I don't really have a quote or anything, but I feel like 20,000 will give you a decent amount to put toward pre-development kind of due diligence stuff. All right, and now let's talk about the acquisition. Do you feel, given the little that you know about your market, you probably know more than I do about your market, but Martha, are you a realtor? I forget, or maybe Beth is. One of you is. No?
No, Kathy McSweeney was, who's part of the CPA. We've
maybe
had
that's what I'm
conversations
thinking.
with her. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking. Well, maybe it would be good to just check in with her if someone doesn't mind, because I did that quick Zillow search, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert on Shrewsbury market. I want to make sure that the budget seems realistic for vacant land, buildable, obviously.
I'll reach out to her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good. And I'm happy to make adjustments, but I also didn't want to expect, I feel like it's relatively aggressive what we're saying for CPA, even if we reduce it to the 10% in year one. So I don't want to go to, I feel like we probably can't go too much higher than $1 million. And if we want to try to do that twice over the course of the 5 years, but I just want to make sure that seems realistic.
And Jen, how would this look like, let's say, for example, like Trulia popped up yesterday, and I saw one Shrewsbury house for 299,000, a fixer upper. How
Yeah.
would that play into something like this?
Yeah, if you wanted to buy like an existing house.
Yes.
Yeah, and as a tear down or to rehab and use as a single family.
Uh, Probably that one would be the rehab and use as a single
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, we didn't add, I think we went back and forth a little bit about this. I remember this coming up at the forum, and we were talking about the kind of the level of expense to create, one unit that way. It would be a deed restricted unit, but it would be buying the property for whatever, 250, 300, whatever it is, and then rehabbing it, which is, who knows, we want to bring it up to code, at least make it a home that's decent to live in and doesn't cost too much for energy costs and that kind of thing, maintenance. And then you sell it to a qualified home buyer, go through a lottery process, hire probably someone qualified to do the lottery and that kind of thing. Sell it with the deed restriction, and then so you get some money back. You get back what the affordable home buyer could afford. So you probably end up spending, I don't know, maybe the affordable home goes for like 200 and you get back, that much, and then you invest the rest.
Would we be nimble enough to execute something like that? Like, for example, if something pops up like this one here, it just popped up yesterday.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if you had the money already in the account, you're not nimble enough if you have to go asking the CPA for funds each time you see something on the property, out on the market. But the issue is that it's going to be harder for you to make hold on, let me scroll back up to your goal.
Goals. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be harder if you're putting that much money into one unit. It's going to be real hard to create that 25 units.
Mhm.
That's why we were starting to favor that bigger project. It's not a huge project, but it's a bigger project that you can do on vacant land, new construction. Hopefully you could get a project of maybe even 20 units on, depending on, the location and the yield of the property and all that kind of thing. But you could get 20 units or so, 100% affordable to a mission-based developer. So I think that's why we were starting to favor that kind of larger acquisition over the one by one kind of
Oh yeah,
turning
no,
homes. Yeah.
it makes sense. It was just a question because that just happened to pop up on my radar yesterday. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh, let me ask.
Yeah.
Well, we're on the call.
I feel like it sounds like an attractive kind of project because you're reusing an existing house, you're, converting it. But if you just look at the money, you'd be able to do, maybe 4 units over the course of the 5 years that way.
We're using, a lot of our resources just for one unit.
Right. So, I mean, if you guys want to take a closer look at this and send me any other comments you have, I'm happy to, take any comments. I won't work on this week. I'll work on it over the course of the following weeks to get it ready for the September 12th deadline. And if there's anything else, going through, we didn't go through actually, maybe we should do that. I kind of glossed over this year 1 action plan because I did revise it a little bit. It's not substantially revised, but I basically took anything that I think you would need to do in the first 12 months after you adopt this plan, which will be in October. So we started the timeline in November. And the idea is that it gives you, and I'm happy to zoom in. Is this big enough?
It is.
Okay. So the idea is that every month the chair or anybody on the committee really can go in and see, all right, what do we need to do this month? And, you can update this as needed. But the idea is that you always know what you're working on. And so Up top, we have some ideas for just, starting to first identify who those local actors, regional, get a list going with contacts, and then just start doing outreach and interviews, inviting them to your meetings on a rolling basis and keeping that conversation going, talking to them about your action plan and what your goals are, and learning more about what they're doing and what they're interested in, that kind of thing. So that's one action. The next one is CPA. And so it's really putting in an application. They accept them on a rolling basis, at least as of their website. I think that's still true. And so I have a timeline here for you to think about. I'm happy to change it if it doesn't make sense, but I have, taking a look at their plan, making sure you provide any comments based on what your action plan now is. You want to make sure that the CPA plan and the housing goals kind of align with the goals that you're working on. So that's the first piece. The second piece is going to a CPC meeting. I know we talked about inviting the CPC members to come to the presentation with the select board on the 26th, but I would recommend you also get on their agenda and go to their meeting in the fall sometime, and talk through this action plan, and talk about how you're about to make an application to them, and this is our 5-year budget, and this is what to expect. And then I would suggest, and the reason I know it's rolling, and the reason I have to submit an application in January or February is because I think it's important to have that dialogue first. We can't necessarily expect the whole CPC to come to the select board meeting. Maybe they will, which would be awesome. But I think going to them would be an extra gesture to kind of have that line of communication open up even more. And then submitting an application for that first year budget, that 10%, like we just talked about, in that January, February timeframe, and then hopefully securing their recommendation, town meeting approval. And then what you want to do is have a memorandum of understanding, or sometimes people will call it a grant agreement. The reason I'm calling it an MOU is because a grant agreement is typically done for an entity that is not the town. So a grant agreement is done for an entity like the Historical Society, or a private developer, or anybody that's not the town. You guys are the town. Sometimes towns forget that the trust is the town. So that's why I'm saying it's a memorandum of agreement, sorry, I said an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, because one town entity to another town entity can't bind each other with a grant agreement because there's no enforceability. It's like holding a conservation restriction on yourselves. Okay, so anyway, just explaining the terminology, but the idea here is that you want to basically secure those funds. And then in the next piece, I have starting in July, because that's when CPA funding could be available for you, starting July 1st with the fiscal year. Then it's basically you have that funding available to support your year one expenses. But the other thing I just want to highlight, as a housing trust, you are required to submit an annual report to the Community Preservation Committee saying what you use the funds for. You have to do that every year before their deadline. I don't know what deadline they'll set for you, but the town is required to submit something called a CP3 report to the state, and that's due every year by September 15th. The town has to tell the state what the CPA funds were used for. And you can't just say it was allocated to the trust and now we have no idea what the trust is doing with it. The trust is obligated to then tell the town, well, this is what we did with it. This is what we spent it on. And you need to do that every year. So you'll want to just coordinate. My guess is they'll probably want that from you by the end of August or something, so that they can get that in by September. Sorry, I think it says 15th. I might have said 13th because the text is really small, but anyway. So that's the CPA stuff. I'm happy to go through the rest of this, but let me just pause and see if that seems logical, if there's any questions on that.
No, it's no question. It's easy to follow, and this is a very helpful tool for us, for me.
Great. Okay, good. And then the next piece is, this is all part of your trying to initiate a development. So the first one is creating a list of potential sites. Maybe it's some of the sites the select board's talking about. Maybe it's other sites that are private out there that are maybe on the market or that you know of, that could be sold. And so really it's really getting into the nitty gritty of properties and sites, starting to do a short list of sites, collaborating with town staff and the select board to determine next steps. So if the select board's, really talking about this now, this is a good time to, really get into that conversation potentially with them about next steps. And then it's outreaching, once you pick some sites, I would recommend you kind of take the idea around to different boards and commissions, including like Conservation Committee or Open Space Commission or any boards or commissions you think would care about what happens to that site. It kind of depends on where that site is and what the nature of it is. But I just want to make sure you have a good early dialogue, because what you don't want to happen is start to make moves to develop it, and then it becomes this big controversial thing because it's listed on the open space plan as a priority open site, or what have you. You don't want to surprise anybody. So that's why I say to kind of shop the ideas around. Maybe you have 2 or 3 sites you're thinking about, and you kind of make the rounds to the different town officials, boards, committees. And then you start to really execute that work plan. So I didn't write all the steps out here because it kind of depends. If it's an acquisition, you're going to be putting in bids and negotiating and whatnot with private owners. If it's a town transfer, it's a whole different system to get the town to transfer land to you. So I just was kind of general there, but I gave you a good, I don't know, how many months is that? 6-7 months to try to get that in order, and then completing with the actual acquisition by the end of the following year. So let me think about this. If your first round of CPA funding would be available in July of wait, did I do this right? Yeah, FY 2025. That's the beginning of FY 2025. So July next year, if you're going to ask for the 10% and get the 10% there, then I'm going to need to I'm going to just shift. I'll probably elongate some of these earlier steps in the acquisition and then shift the actual acquisition into the following fiscal year so that you have that second year request to CPA for the higher amount and you have more money in the bank. You guys following my logic there?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the big change I'll make. So I'll just like elongate out these initial steps so that you don't do the acquisition that year, and I'll shift it out like another 6 months. And then this is just the housing production plan. I actually wasn't sure what time frame, like what the schedule is and if it started. I'm sorry if Christopher, you probably told me and I didn't write it down. So if this needs to change, I'm happy to change it to align with whatever the time frame is. But I basically have reviewing housing needs assessment this fall, and then participating in various engagement, whatever they're proposing for public forum or survey or focus groups, and then providing feedback on draft goals and strategies, and then attending whatever the closing meetings with the planning board, select board, to show your support for the housing production plan. So that's kind of the steps. I just wasn't quite sure like when it was starting up and if I aligned that right with the scope. And Chris and Louise, I don't know if you have any other information on the housing production plan and like the timeline, because I'm happy to adjust this as needed.
We still have to get that initiative up and running, so we haven't started that process yet. But yeah, so the timeline will be dependent upon when that gets going.
Do you have funding? You have funding for it already, right?
We would be looking for the Affordable Housing Trust to fund that. So, but we'll put
okay. So
together a
I need to
proposal for
add that to their budget then. Okay. So let me I'm going to add that. And do you have a budget in mind already, or do you need some guidance on that? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, we can talk offline about that.
Okay. All right. So I'll add an expense line item in that year one, and then why don't I assume that this maybe won't start till the new year, because if you still need to like get the money, put a RFP out, select who's doing it, and then start it up. So I'll kind of shift this all down to start, maybe even like second quarter of the new year, just to give you a little buffer. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good. And then the next one is just I didn't want you guys to forget, not that you would, but I just wanted to add in the annual town requirements. To do an annual report for town meeting, you submit it to the select board, and I didn't know the exact date of when that would be due, but I just put you doing it somewhere between February and April, and that the report includes your annual audit of the books and records, and then I have attending town meeting here as well. Does that make sense with the time frame that I'm talking about?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's it. So if you guys want to take a closer look at everything, everything else is pretty much the same, but if you want to, tweak any language on the earlier parts that you've looked at already, I'm happy to do that, and I'll make the changes on the budget we talked about. And then get that ready for the 12th to submit, okay?
Okay. Can I get that the newer version? I was just checking my inbox. I don't know why I missed it.
Yeah, I think Louise, do you?
Yeah, I just checked. I did send it to everyone on, I think it was August 24th. So I can resend that if you don't have it, but I did send that out to the trust.
And if you guys want to take, even till early next week, next Monday's from Labor Day. So if you want to, send me any comments you have by Tuesday morning, that's plenty of time for me to address them before the 12th.
Yeah. Louise, if you could just check those two attachments. One was a Word doc, the other one was a PDF.
Yep, I think one was
yeah.
one was the Excel document.
Oh, that's right.
With the budget. Yeah.
I gave you the Excel in case anybody wanted to play around with it.
It says AHT revised action plan and budget. It was sent on Friday the 25th, but happy to resend it.
Okay.
I think you responded to that email, Hector.
Yeah, no, I don't know why what I printed out does not match what's here, but I'll look at it again.
Okay.
All right, good. And then the format for the select board, I have that down as in person. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And then what I'll just have like a very straightforward PowerPoint, nothing too long, but roughly how much time do you feel like would be appropriate for me to present?
I can touch base with the town manager's office and they'll give a amount of time that they're looking for.
Okay, that sounds great. And then I was going to provide the report by the 12th, but I'm hoping you're going to tell me I don't need to get the PowerPoint done by the 12th. Is that fair?
I will double check with the town manager's office.
Okay. There'll be nothing new in the PowerPoint. It's going to be just like a simplified version of what's in the report.
Okay. I will get back to you as soon as
Okay,
hopefully by the end
I
of the week.
appreciate it. Thank you. All right, good. That's everything I had. I don't know if there's any other, questions you have for me or anything else, but I'm happy to stay on if that's helpful.
Sorry, Hector. We do have a member of the public here, so I don't know, Stephanie, if you had any questions for the trust. I knew you, so feel free to raise your hand or send a chat if you do have any questions. But no pressure. Just wanted to make sure you knew you were.
No,
There
I'm
we
good.
go.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Any next steps? So we discussed the next steps. We'll be getting the draft we'll receive the draft on the 12th. And we have our select board meeting on the 26th. I don't think there's anything between now and then, any additional meetings that we will have.
I have a question.
oth-
Should we plan on attending the select board meeting as well with you? Or is that, okay,
We should, yes, the entire team.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, in fact, it would be great. I'm sorry, is Hector, are you still chair or who's the chair right now? It's Hector because you're leading the
Yeah.
meeting. Yeah,
Mhm.
so it would be great if you could introduce me to the select board and just say like why you wanted to do this and that kind of thing. Just very
Yes.
brief. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem. Great. Anything else? Any other new business? No.
No?
All right, this was easy.
All
Can I
good.
motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I need roll call. Martha,
Here?
Carlos,
Aye.
Beth?
Aye.
Okay, Hector, aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And I'll looking forward to receiving the updated one, and we'll send out our comments. Have a good night.
Thank you.
See you soon. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.